The sun was dying over Dry Creek, bleeding out in long red streaks across the desert sky. The wind that came off the plains carried dust, whiskey fumes, and the low moan of a harmonica drifting from the Silver Spur saloon. Inside, the air was thick with cigar smoke and the laughter of men who'd worked too hard and drunk too much to remember their sins. At the corner table sat Clay Maddox, his black hat tipped low, a deck of cards resting lazy in his hands. Clay wasn't just another gambler. Folks in Dry Creek called him the Million Man, not because he owned $1 million, but because he'd won that much, one bet at a time, from men who thought luck was on their side. He was tall and broad-shouldered, the kind of man who looked carved out of sandstone. A scar ran along his left jaw, and when he smiled, which was rare, it never reached his eyes. Tonight, though, he was in a mood. He'd just cleared out every table in the saloon, pocketing gold, deeds, and a fine pocket watch engraved with a governor's initials. The piano clanked out an off-key tune as the crowd pressed closer. Clay shuffled his cards slow, savoring the sound of his own voice over the ruckus. "Boys," he drawled, "there ain't a man or woman in this whole damn territory that can outlast me. Not in cards, not in whiskey, not in anything." Laughter rolled through the saloon like thunder. Old Hank, the bartender, polished a glass and shook his head. "You're riding high tonight, Maddox, but pride's a dangerous horse to break." Clay smirked, downing his whiskey in one swallow. "Maybe so, but I ain't never been thrown yet." And then, as if fate itself had decided to call his bluff, a soft voice came from behind the bar, clear, low, and steady as a church bell. "Ain't no woman could last one night with you, huh? That's what you're saying, mister?" Every head turned. She stood there in a plain blue dress, sleeves rolled up to her elbows, auburn hair tied back with a strip of leather. She wasn't like the saloon girls, and no rouge, no frills. Just a woman with eyes sharp enough to cut glass and a face that had seen both kindness and fire. Her name was Josie Hartwell, though few men in Dry Creek knew much more than that. Clay turned toward her, amused. "That's right, darlin'. A million says no woman west of the Mississippi can last one night in my company without losing her patience, her temper, or her heart." The room erupted with whistles and laughter. Josie didn't flinch. She set her rag on the counter, stepped closer, and met his stare with the calm of a woman who'd faced worse than swaggering cowboys. "$1 million, huh?" she said, voice cool as the whiskey she poured. "Then try me." The laughter died. "You could have heard a card drop." Clay blinked, studying her. She wasn't bluffing. There was something about the way she held her ground, steady as a gunfighter in a duel. Her hands didn't tremble. Her eyes didn't wander. "You?" Clay said slowly, a grin forming. "You don't look the gambling kind." Josie smiled, just a hint. "I ain't, but I don't lose," the crowd murmured. Old Hank muttered, "Lord help her." Clay rose from his chair, boots thudding on the wooden floor. He was used to women flirting, teasing, playing games, but Josie wasn't playing. There was iron in her voice and a challenge in her eyes that stirred something in him he hadn't felt in years. "You really mean to make that wager?" he asked, tipping his hat back. "I do." "And what'll it be? A night in conversation, whiskey, or a test of patience?" "All of it," Josie said. "You said no woman could last the night." "I'll last it, Clay Maddox." Till sunrise, the saloon went quiet. Someone muttered a prayer. Clay looked around, relishing the attention. "All right, boys. You heard the lady? $1 million bet. She says she can last the night in my company. I say she can't." He turned back to Josie, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "You sure you want to play this hand, sweetheart?" "Stakes are high." Josie leaned in slightly, her breath brushing his ear. "I've played for higher stakes than you'll ever know." And with that, the bet was made. The night wore on, and word spread through town like wildfire. By the time the clock struck 10, half of Dry Creek had gathered outside the Silver Spur, whispering, laughing, waiting to see what would happen. Inside, the saloon was nearly empty except for Clay and Josie. The piano player packed up, the bartender locked the till, and the lamps dimmed to a warm amber glow. Josie poured the last drink of the night. "One for you," she said, sliding a glass across the bar. "And one for me." Clay raised an eyebrow. "So that's how you plan to last the night? Drown me in whiskey?" Josie shrugged, sipping slow. "You'll find I don't drown easy." He smiled, and for real this time. There was something about her tone, that mix of defiance and grace, that caught him off guard. He was used to winning by charm, by talk, by confidence, but Josie's quiet strength was different. It wasn't for show. "So tell me," he said, swirling his glass, Why's a woman like you wasting her nights in a place like this? Josie glanced toward the window where the desert wind whispered against the glass. Ain't wasting nothing. Sometimes a woman's just gotta hide where no one thinks to look. Clay studied her face, the small scar near her collarbone, the steady way she breathed. He didn't ask more, not yet. Fair enough, he said. Then let's see how long you can last, Miss Hartwell. Josie smiled faintly. Call me Josie and I'll outlast the both of us. The clock ticked on. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance. Inside, two people who'd started as a boast and a dare sat facing each other. Not as gambler and waitress, but as man and woman caught in something neither had planned for. By midnight, the cards lay forgotten, the whiskey half finished, and the air between them thick with unspoken questions. Clay had made countless bets in his life, for money, for pride, for victory. But for the first time he felt a wager cut deeper than gold. Josie wasn't a woman to conquer. She was a storm to be weathered. And as the clock struck 12, Clay Maddox realized something he'd never admit out loud, that the night had already begun to belong to her. The rain started not long after midnight, soft at first, then drumming against the roof of the Silver Spur like 1,000 restless hooves. Thunder rolled across the plains, echoing off the empty storefronts of Dry Creek. Most of the town was asleep, except for the saloon, where two souls stayed awake to finish a bet that had already turned into something far more dangerous. Inside, the lamps flickered, throwing long shadows against the walls. The poker tables were empty now, chairs turned over, the piano quiet. Only the bar stood lit where Clay Maddox sat, hat off. Sleeves rolled to his elbows, eyes steady on Josie Hartwell. She moved behind the counter with a calm grace, collecting glasses, wiping down the bar, pretending not to notice the way he watched her. Clay wasn't used to silence. He'd filled a lifetime with talk, jokes, boasts, and quick lies meant to charm. But Josie's quiet had a way of pulling the words right out of him like gravity. So, he finally said, breaking the stillness. How long you been working here? Josie didn't look up. Long enough to know men talk too much when they're losing. Clay chuckled. And you reckon I'm losing already? I reckon you're trying awful hard not to show it. He leaned back, letting out a low whistle. You got a sharp tongue, Miss Hartwell. She finally met his gaze, her lips curving in the faintest hint of a smile. Sharp tongues are the only thing that keep women alive in places like this. That silenced him for a moment. The rain picked up and the air smelled of wet dust and whiskey. Clay poured them both another drink. To survival, then. Josie took the glass but didn't drink. To truth, she corrected softly. He tilted his head. Truth, huh? You one of those preacher types? Her eyes hardened. Preachers don't come to Dry Creek, they know better. Something in her tone made Clay pause. There was a weight behind those words, something that hinted at pain, maybe guilt. But he didn't press her. He'd learned long ago that every soul in the West carried its secrets like a sidearm, always loaded, always ready to fire if touched the wrong way. Instead, he said, You ever think of leaving this place? Josie laughed, not cruelly, but with a sad kind of amusement. Leave and go where? East, where they look at women like me as dirt? Or west, where the desert swallows you whole? Dry Creek might be ugly, but it's honest. You can see the dust coming before it hits your face. Clay nodded slowly, impressed despite himself. You talk like you've been everywhere. I've been far enough to stop wanting to go further, she said, setting the glass down. They fell silent again. Outside, lightning flashed, turning the saloon's windows white for a split second. Clay caught a glimpse of Josie's face, calm, strong, and marked by something he couldn't name. He wanted to know her story, how she ended up here, what ghosts she carried. But he also knew he had no right to ask. After all, he'd never shared his own. Still, he couldn't help himself. You ever been in love? He asked. Josie froze, the rag in her hand tightening. Once, she said quietly. And you? Clay laughed, though there was no joy in it. Plenty of times. Or so I thought. She glanced up, eyes narrowing. Then why are you so lonely? That hit him harder than a bullet. He opened his mouth, then shut it again. No one had ever called him lonely before. They'd called him rich, charming, dangerous, but lonely. That was a truth most men spent their whole lives avoiding. He reached for his glass, but his hand trembled just a little. You read people too easy, Josie. That's a dangerous habit. Only for men who don't like being seen, she said. He leaned forward, elbows on the bar. And what do you see when you look at me? Her voice softened. A man who keeps winning so he don't have to remember what he's lost. Clay stared at her, the words sinking deep. For the first time in years, he had no clever reply. The clock on the wall ticked louder than the storm. Midnight slid into 1 o'clock. Josie moved to the fireplace, adding another log, her shadow stretching long across the floor. You don't sleep much, do you? He asked. Sleep's for people who ain't running, she said. Clay frowned. And what are you running from? She looked into the fire, her face glowing orange in the light. Nothing I can outrun. He could have let it go, should have maybe, but something in her tone pulled him closer. You know, he said softly, a woman like you don't belong in a place like this. Josie turned, a sad smile tugging at her lips. And what kind of place does a woman like me belong in, Clay Maddox? He didn't answer. Because truth be told, he didn't know. Instead, he walked over, took her empty glass, and poured another round. How about we stop talking and start playing? Cards, dice, questions. Your choice. She studied him, then nodded. Questions, 1 each. You answer honest, so do I, he grinned. Fair enough. Josie's first question came quick. What's the worst thing you ever did? Clay hesitated, the whiskey glass halfway to his lips. He looked away. Left my brother behind in a cattle raid up north. He didn't make it. Josie's expression softened. You blame yourself? Every damn day, she nodded slowly. Your turn. He thought a moment. What's the best thing you ever did? Josie's eyes glistened in the firelight. Buried my mama proper, even when we didn't have a coffin. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind that settles between two people who've seen too much to pretend otherwise. By 2 in the morning, the whiskey bottle was half empty, and both of them were leaning closer without realizing it. The rain outside eased to a soft drizzle. Clay's voice dropped low. You ever think maybe we meet the people we're supposed to lose? Josie tilted her head. Or maybe we meet them to remind us we can still feel something. Their eyes locked. For a long moment, neither moved. The storm outside faded into silence. Then, without warning, a gust of wind burst through the cracks in the window, snuffing out one of the lamps. The sudden darkness startled them both, and for a second Clay's hand brushed hers. Neither pulled away. He looked down at their joined hands. Well, Josie Hartwell, he murmured. Seems you're doing better than I figured. She smiled faintly. Night ain't over yet, Clay Maddox. No, he said, his voice quiet. It sure as hell ain't. And as the clock struck 3, Clay realized the strangest thing. He didn't want the night to end. The bet, the money, the pride, none of it mattered anymore. What mattered was the woman standing across from him, calm as a prairie dawn, with eyes that could see straight through his lies. For the first time in a long, lonely life, Clay Maddox felt something he couldn't gamble away. Hope. The clock struck 3 and the fire had burned low, throwing soft orange light across the wooden floorboards of the Silver Spur saloon. The rain had eased into a mist outside, and Dry Creek lay silent, the kind of silence only the desert knew, deep and endless. Inside, Clay Maddox sat slouched at the bar, eyes half closed, his hat resting beside a near-empty glass. Across from him, Josie Hartwell poured the last of the whiskey into 2 glasses and slid one toward him. Neither spoke for a while. The air between them was heavy with the kind of stillness that comes after too much honesty. You're quiet, Josie said softly. Clay gave a faint smile. Guess I ain't used to talking about things that matter. You mean your brother? His smile vanished. He nodded once, staring into the amber in his glass as though he could see the past swimming in it. We ran cattle together out near the Red Mesa 6 years back. Got jumped by rustlers, men I thought were friends. I was leading the drive, so when the shooting started... He looked to me. He stopped, jaw tightening. Josie waited. I ran, Clay said finally. Took a bullet to the shoulder and kept riding. Figured he was right behind me. His voice cracked. He wasn't. Josie set her glass down, eyes softening. How old was he? 22. Thought he was invincible. Hell, maybe he was till I proved him wrong. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small folded piece of paper, worn soft from years of being handled. Letter he left me. I never opened it. Josie's brow furrowed. Why not? 'Cause I already know what it says, Clay muttered. That I'm a coward. That he died thinking his big brother turned tail. He placed the letter on the bar, the edges dark from sweat and whiskey. For a long while, neither of them moved. The fire popped once, the sound echoing like a gunshot. Then Josie said quietly, "You ever think maybe he wrote you something else?" Clay looked up, eyes flashing. "You don't know him." "No," she said gently, "but I know guilt. It'll eat you alive if you let it." He said nothing. His hands trembled slightly as he picked up the letter, staring at it like it might explode. Josie's voice softened. "You should read it, Clay." He hesitated, then unfolded the brittle paper. The ink was faded, but the handwriting, strong and sure, cut him straight to the bone. "Clay, if you're reading this, it means I didn't make it. Don't you dare blame yourself. You did what I would have done. You lived. Ain't no shame in surviving. Just promise me one thing. Stop running from what scares you. You ain't made to die alone in the dust." By the time he finished, his throat was tight. He folded the letter carefully and slid it back into his pocket. "Damn fool," he whispered, voice breaking. He was always the brave one. Josie reached across the bar, her fingers brushing his wrist. A simple touch, steady and kind. "Maybe you were too. You just forgot how." Clay looked at her, eyes raw with something he couldn't hide anymore. "You talk like a preacher again." She smiled faintly. "I talk like someone who's lost, same as you." For the first time, he saw the exhaustion in her face, the lines near her eyes, the way her hands never quite rested. He realized she'd been hiding her own storm behind that calm stare. He leaned forward. "What about you, Josie Hartwell? What ghosts keep you awake?" Her eyes flicked toward the window, where dawn was still a few hours off. The question hung in the air, heavy as a confession. Finally, she said, "You ever kill a man, Clay?" His gaze sharpened. "In a fight, sure. On the trail. Never by choice." Josie nodded slowly. "Then you know what it's like to see the life leave someone's eyes." He said nothing. She swallowed hard. "There was a ranch near Santa Fe, belonged to my family. After Pa died working the rails, some men tried to take it. Said we owed back taxes we didn't. One night they came drunk, 2 of them, guns in hand. Ma screamed, my brother fought, and one of them pulled her by the hair. I didn't think. I just grabbed Pa's rifle and fired." Her voice trembled, though she kept her chin high. "He fell dead on the porch. The other one ran. I buried Ma and took my brother south. But the sheriff, when he was kin to the man I shot, put a price on my head before Ma was even in the ground." Clay stared at her, stunned. "You're saying you're wanted?" "I'm saying if the law finds me, I hang." He let out a long breath, running a hand through his hair. "Hell, Josie." She looked up sharply, expecting pity, maybe disgust. Instead, she found only quiet understanding. "I killed a man, too," Clay said. "Back when I was younger. Didn't mean to, but I did. Ain't been a day since I didn't see his face when I closed my eyes. You and me, we're both ghosts walking in daylight." Josie's eyes softened again. "Maybe that's why we met." "Maybe," he said quietly. Outside, the wind howled again, slamming the saloon doors. The sudden noise jolted them both, and the moment of confession shifted into uneasy silence. Josie stood, walking toward the window, her silhouette framed by the faint gray of the coming dawn. "You ever wonder if there's such a thing as redemption out here?" Clay leaned against the bar. "Out here? Redemption's just a word men use when they want to pretend they ain't sinners." She turned, her gaze fierce now. "You don't believe a man can change?" He paused, meeting her eyes. "I believe a man can try, but out here trying don't count for much. For a heartbeat." The air between them burned with the rawness of truth. Then Josie crossed the room, slow and deliberate until she was standing just a foot away. "You're wrong," she whispered. "It's the only thing that counts." Clay didn't move. The faint scent of her, rain, smoke, and something faintly sweet like wild sage, filled his lungs. He swallowed hard. "You sure you ain't trying to win this bet by making me fall for you?" Josie smiled faintly, a glint in her eye. "Maybe I already have." They stood there, inches apart, the fire crackling behind them and the rain hissing softly against the windows. 2 broken souls who'd seen too much of life, staring into the possibility that maybe, just maybe, they weren't beyond saving. When the clock struck 4, Clay poured the last of the whiskey. "Sun'll be up soon," he said. Josie nodded. "Then I'll have won your bet." He smiled, tired, crooked, and real. "Maybe you already did." Outside, the first light of dawn touched the horizon, soft and pale. Neither of them noticed. Inside that lonely saloon, the world had shrunk to 2 people, 2 pasts, and a single fragile thread of hope holding them together. The first streaks of dawn crept over Dry Creek, painting the horizon in dull gold and dusty pink. The rain had stopped, leaving the desert air cool and sharp, carrying with it the scent of wet earth and mesquite. Inside the Silver Spur saloon, the lamp still burned low, throwing soft shadows over the bar where Clay Maddox and Josie Hartwell sat in the quiet aftermath of confession. Neither spoke for a long while. Clay's head rested against the back of his chair, eyes half shut, his mind wandering through old regrets and new feelings he didn't dare name. Josie sat across from him, arms folded, gazing out the window as the sun began to edge over the mountains. The silence between them was different now, not the sharp, guarded quiet of strangers, but the heavy, aching stillness that settles between two people who have seen too much of each other's souls. At last, Josie spoke. "You ever think about starting over?" Clay cracked an eye open. "Starting over's for men who got something left to trade." She turned to face him, a faint smirk tugging her lips. "You got plenty left," he chuckled low, shaking his head. "You don't know me that well." "Oh, I think I do," she said softly. "You just hide it better than most." He looked at her then, really looked, and for a fleeting second he thought he saw a life he could have had. A life with laughter instead of gunfire, a porch instead of a saloon, maybe even a family. But like the morning fog outside, the thought was gone before it took shape. Then came the sound that shattered the calm, the heavy creak of the saloon doors swinging open. Clay straightened in his chair, his hand instinctively brushing the pistol at his hip. Josie froze. The light from the doorway cut through the dimness, and standing there was a man in a brown duster coat, badge glinting in the sunlight. Sheriff Tate. He was built like a bear and looked twice as mean, his eyes cold beneath the brim of his hat. A few other men lingered behind him, rifles in hand. "Mornin', Clay," the sheriff said, stepping inside. His voice was low and even, the kind that never needed to shout to command a room. Clay didn't move. "Tate, didn't expect you up this early." Tate's gaze swept the room, landing square on Josie. "Heard there was some excitement here last night. $1 million bet, was it?" Clay smiled faintly. Word travels fast. Tate's expression didn't change. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper, yellowed, creased, official. He slapped it down on the bar. "You know her name, Clay?" Clay didn't look. "Maybe." Tate leaned closer. "Her name's Josie Hartwell. There's a price on her head from Santa Fe to El Paso, wanted for murder." Josie's face went pale, but her voice stayed steady. "You came all this way for me, Sheriff?" Tate gave a dry smile. "I go where the law takes me." Clay stood then, slow and deliberate, placing himself between the sheriff and Josie. "She's under my protection." The sheriff's hand dropped to his holster. "That so? You protecting murderers now, Maddox?" Clay's jaw tightened. "You don't know the story." "I don't need to," Tate said. "The law's the law." The tension in the room thickened. The deputies shifted their rifles. Josie's breath caught, her eyes darting between the two men. Clay's hand hovered near his gun, not to threaten but ready if he had to. Finally Tate sighed, shaking his head. "Don't make me do this, Clay. You're a lot of things, but I never took you for a fool." "Maybe I am," Clay said quietly. "But I ain't letting you take her." Tate's voice hardened. "She killed a man." "She killed the right one," Clay shot back. "You of all people should understand that." For a long, tense moment no one moved. The only sound was the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. Then Tate's gaze softened just a fraction. "You care about her." Clay didn't answer, but the look in his eyes said more than words ever could. The sheriff let out a slow breath. "You always were a damn fool for a lost cause, Clay." Josie stepped forward, her voice breaking the spell. "Don't do this, Clay. I won't have you risk your life for mine." He turned to her, his eyes fierce. "Ain't your choice, Josie. You said you don't lose." "Well, neither do I, not when it matters." The sheriff's hand twitched near his belt, then stilled. He stared at the two of them, the outlaw woman and the gambler who'd spent his whole life running from himself. And something in his face changed. He holstered his gun. "You got till sundown, Maddox," he said finally. "Then I come back. If she's still here, I take her in, dead or alive." Clay nodded once. "Fair enough." Tate turned to leave, pausing at the doorway. "Don't make me regret this." When the doors swung shut behind him, the silence that followed was deafening. Josie turned to Clay, her voice shaking. Why'd you do that? You should have let him take me. Clay stared out the window, watching the dust shimmer in the dawn light. Because I ain't letting the law decide who deserves to live. Not after all I've done, her eyes glistened. He'll be back, I know. You can still save yourself. Tell him I forced you. Clay looked at her then, and for the first time, Josie saw something in his expression that frightened her. Not anger, not regret, but peace. I ain't running anymore, he said simply. The words hung in the air like a verdict. Josie's throat tightened. Then I'll go. I'll leave before sundown. He shook his head. If you go now, he'll hunt you. You need a head start, and you need money. He walked behind the bar, pulled open the drawer where he kept his winnings, and shoved a thick stack of bills into a saddlebag. Then he turned to her. Take it, ride south. There's a man named Elroy Gentry near the border. He owes me. He'll get you across. Josie stared at the bag, then at him. Clay, you can't stay here. He smiled faintly. I made $1 million bet, remember? Gotta see it through. Tears welled in her eyes. You don't have to prove nothing. He stepped closer, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Ain't about proving. It's about finishing something right for once. For a long moment, they just stood there, the world narrowing to the space between them. Outside, the town stirred awake. The blacksmith's hammer, the whinny of horses, the murmur of another day beginning. But inside, time stood still. Josie finally whispered, You're gonna get yourself killed. Clay smiled. Slow, calm, certain. Maybe, but I'll die with a clean hand for once. She reached up, her fingers trembling as they brushed his cheek. You fool. He caught her hand and pressed it against his chest. Maybe, but you're my kind of fool. And with that, she turned away, tears spilling freely now. She slung the saddlebag over her shoulder and walked toward the door. Just before stepping out, she looked back. I won the bet, Clay Maddox, she said, her voice breaking. You just don't know it yet. He gave a small, crooked grin. Yeah, maybe you did. She pushed through the doors and disappeared into the brightening morning, her figure swallowed by the dust and light. Clay watched until she was gone. Then he poured himself a final drink, the amber liquid catching the sunrise like fire. Here's to you, Josie Hartwell, he murmured. The only hand I ever lost worth remembering. He downed the whiskey and waited for sundown. The sun began its slow descent behind the desert hills, painting the sky in strokes of copper and blood. Dry Creek lay quiet, almost too quiet, as if the whole town knew the air carried the weight of something final. The tumbleweeds didn't roll. The dogs didn't bark. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Inside the Silver Spur Saloon, Clay Maddox sat alone at the same table where, a lifetime ago, or maybe just last night, he'd made that fateful bet. The empty glasses and scattered cards around him looked like ghosts of every hand he'd ever played wrong. His pistol lay on the table beside his whiskey, both gleaming in the fading light. The clock on the wall ticked toward sundown. Every tick was a drumbeat closer to the inevitable. He wasn't afraid. Not anymore. For the first time in his life, Clay felt something close to peace. He'd spent years running from the law, from himself, from the memories that chewed at him in the dark. But now, in this small town, with one wild-hearted waitress who'd smiled at him like he was worth saving, he'd found a reason to stop running. Josie Hartwell was gone. Riding south, he hoped, maybe already across the border, maybe free. He'd made sure she had enough money, enough time, enough hope, and he'd made his choice. When the saloon doors creaked open, Clay didn't turn. He already knew who it was. Sheriff Tate stepped inside, boots heavy on the worn floorboards. The light behind him cast his shadow long and dark across the saloon. He had no deputies with him this time, just his badge, his gun, and the grim set of a man who'd come to finish what he started. Evenin', Clay, he said, his voice carrying the weight of the dying light. Clay didn't look up. Sheriff, you know why I'm here? I reckon I do. Tate took a slow step forward. Where's the girl? Gone. Gone where? Clay smiled faintly. Someplace I can't follow. The sheriff's hand twitched near his belt. You helped her escape, didn't you? Clay finally raised his eyes. She didn't need my help. Just my word. The sheriff studied him for a long moment, then sighed. You always did pick the wrong side of trouble. Maybe, Clay said. But this time I picked it for the right reason. Tate walked to the bar and poured himself a glass from Clay's bottle. He drank, then set it down with a clink that echoed. You know I can't walk away from this, Clay. Law's law. Clay nodded. I ain't asking you to. They stared at each other in the thickening silence, the last light bleeding through the window slats, striping their faces like prison bars. You could ride out now, Tate said quietly. Head north. You'd be halfway to Carson before anyone knew you were gone. Clay smiled. Not a gambler's smirk this time, but something softer. I told you before, Sheriff. I'm done running. Tate's eyes flickered just for a second with something like respect. Then let's get it over with. Clay rose slowly, his chair scraping against the wooden floor. He reached for his pistol. Not quick, not threatening, just deliberate. He laid it flat on the table. Won't be needing that, Tate frowned. You expect me to shoot an unarmed man? No, Clay said. I expect you to do what you came here for. But I ain't drawing first, the sheriff hesitated. His hand hovered near his holster. You make this hard, Clay. Clay's voice was steady. Ain't life always been? Outside, the sun finally dipped below the hills. The last ray of light cut across the saloon, catching Clay's face. A brief golden flash before the dark swallowed it whole. Tate exhaled, slow and heavy. Then instead of reaching for his gun, he turned to the bar and poured another drink. You're lucky I'm tired of burying men I once called friends, he said. Clay blinked. That so? Tate nodded, eyes on the whiskey. You want redemption, Clay? You got it. As far as I'm concerned, that girl died crossing the border. You just happened to be gone when I filed the report, Clay's brows furrowed. You letting me walk? Tate looked at him then, eyes hard but not unkind. No, I'm letting you live. For the first time in years, Clay didn't have a comeback. He just stood there watching as the sheriff tossed a coin onto the counter, payment for the whiskey, and walked toward the door. When Tate reached the threshold, he paused. You find her, Clay. Don't waste it this time. Clay opened his mouth, but the words didn't come. Tate tipped his hat and stepped out into the dark. The doors swung shut behind him. And just like that, the silver spur was silent again. Clay sat back down, staring at the coin the sheriff had left. The metal glimmered faintly in the lamplight, a small shining thing in a room full of ghosts. He let out a slow, ragged laugh. Guess I won the bet after all. But even as he said it, he knew he hadn't. The real winner was out there somewhere beyond the desert. With her hair whipping in the wind and that wild smile lighting up the horizon, Josie Hartwell, the woman who'd walked into his life with a dare and walked out with his heart. 3 days later, the town of Dry Creek woke to find the silver spur empty. No Clay Maddox, no note. Just a playing card pinned to the wall with a knife and the Queen of Hearts. Word spread fast. Some said he'd gone after her. Others swore he'd joined a cattle drive east. A few claimed he rode straight into the desert and never came back. But one story, the one whispered most often around campfires, said a woman, matching Josie's description, was spotted weeks later near the Mexican border, tending bar in a dusty cantina. One night a quiet man walked in, his hat low, his boots worn, and his eyes full of stories he'd never tell. They say she smiled when she saw him and he smiled back. No words, no grand reunion, just that knowing look between two souls who'd already found what they were looking for. A place where the past couldn't reach, and the future was theirs to gamble. The desert wind rose that night, carrying dust and memory through the canyons. Somewhere out there, beneath the same stars that had watched them both, two riders disappeared into the dark, side by side, free at last. And if you listened close enough, you might have heard his voice on the wind, soft and certain. Told you, Josie, no woman could last the night. And her laughter drifting after it like music. Then I guess you ain't met your match, Clay Maddox.